You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brennan Weissel.
Sam Jane.
And Michael House.
This week, we are joined by Rudy Winkler, who 2 months ago was in Paris, 2024 Olympic Games, and he finished 6th place in the hammer throw. Rudy, take it away. This week, we welcome on Rudy Winkler. He's a 3-time Olympian in the hammer throw, and as of last year, an assistant throws coach at Maryland. Rudy, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
So it's been just about 2 months since the Olympics, just about 2 months since the Olympics.
Yeah.
When you look back now, your 6th place finish, how are you feeling, and how are you feeling about the whole experience as a whole?
I feel pretty good about it. It's a funny sport where you're always measuring yourself against your best performances or your best distances, right? So it's easy to get caught up in feeling like, I felt like I was in better shape going into the meet. I think I could have come away with a medal, but the experience of the whole trip, the experience of being there, also being able to make it to that level and still place top 6. I kind of had a wonky season with injuries and I didn't compete much, so being able to reflect on it now 2 months later, I feel really proud of it, and it's been exciting to feel that way.
So just take me back, right? Because 3 years ago, obviously in Tokyo, there's no fans, you have no family. Can you just describe the difference of what it was like being in Paris, being around your family, and having way more supporters, way more American supporters there at your back?
I mean, it was huge. It made all the difference. I think in Tokyo, it felt a bit strange being there with no fans, not even just no family, just like stadium was totally empty when we were competing. And there was some of the magic with the Olympics that nobody really got to experience. None of the athletes got to experience, right? Because not only was there no fans or family or anything like that allowed to go, but we weren't really allowed to leave the village. It was like they knew where we were at all times, to the point where we basically were only allowed to go from village to training or from village to the competition and then back. And then once you were done competing, you got 2 days in the village, or I guess you left after 2 days, which means you only had one more full day after your last day of competition, and then they sent you home. So there was no way to enjoy the experience. After you competed, you just went immediately from that experience directly to going home. So this experience was a lot different, just in the fact that results-wise, they were pretty similar, but at least I was able to be with my family, be with my friends and other supporters who came from the U.S. to visit. And it made just the whole week feel like it was more than just the competition for me. And I think that was really important and made the trip feel a lot more special. So I feel like I came away with a lot more fond memories of this trip than I did in Tokyo.
One of the coolest things I think about the Olympics is you have, LeBron James, Simone Biles, Katie Ledecky, and then people who, up until that point, most sports fans have never heard of, right? How does interactions like that work? Do you run into different Olympic athletes? Do you almost do they kind of give that same, respect or interaction because you're an Olympian, or is it almost oh my gosh, I'm standing next to, Steph Curry or somebody among that nature? Take me through that kind of, vibes or feelings you're having when you're meeting these people.
There's still some of that starstruck power that you feel in the village or at the Olympics, right? LeBron James is just so much more popular, I guess, than the average Olympian there. And I think people don't really realize, or maybe they just don't think about it, is 98% of the athletes that are competing at an Olympic Games are in kind of niche sports that you may not see on daytime or even primetime television. And they're maybe from countries that you may not have even heard of before, or knew that there was really teams that had participated. So I think there's definitely levels to it when you're there. I got to meet Simone Biles. She wouldn't be able to tell you that I met her because, she meets so many people and so many Olympians were coming up to her and trying to take pictures with her. But even her, it's I almost felt bad in a way, because even in the village where you would expect people to be respectful of her space and her, there not being like paparazzi or media in the village. There was still, when she walked around, there were people taking pictures and videos of her and approaching her, asking for pictures, which I'm sure to an extent is lovely, but it's an interesting dichotomy. Now within the sport, there's definitely like within track and field, right? Like I've gotten to meet like Noah Lyles and a couple other, like Fred Curley, a couple other really popular athletes. And I wouldn't say we're friends, but we're acquaintances, and like we get along and we've hung out. And from that aspect, just because we're around each other a lot more, it's cool to just kind of, like we respect each other as Olympians first and foremost. And even in those interactions with like Simone Biles, like she still is willing to give you the time as an Olympian, knowing that you're there kind of under the same circumstances that she is, despite being so much more popular. So definitely really cool being there and getting to experience all that.
Obviously, I'm sure a lot of your time was spent around the track and obviously doing hammer throw, but did you get a chance to kind of check out any other sports, or like what other stuff at the Olympics, what other events at the Olympics do you like find the best to check out that you would not have the opportunity to do maybe in the US or maybe at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't get to go to many other events. I was with my family. Tickets were just really expensive. I could get tickets through being an athlete, but then I didn't want to go by myself, so my family would have had to have bought tickets, and that was just kind of complicated to get last minute. But after my fiance left, I went to breakdancing, which was incredible. I know people kind of like goofed on it online, but I went to the men's final and it was spectacular. The crowd was super into it. It was a sold out stadium. It was in kind of like the center of Paris, around a bunch of monuments, so you could see them kind of around in the background, over the top of the stands. And it's cool from the aspect of like, even in breakdancing, those were people I saw in the village, in the medical room, or in the dining area getting food, and to see them actually go out and do the thing that they have been training and practicing for is kind of special. But I think breakdancing specifically, I feel very fortunate to have seen, just because of the perception of it and how everyone kind of thought it was kind of goofy, and getting to see it in person and be like, well, this actually is really, really cool. And maybe it would take a while, or maybe it, it's not in the next Olympics, but maybe these like more formal breakdancing competitions will kind of take off and they'll figure out how to cover it a little bit better and maybe showcase those things. But yeah, it's you're just surrounded for the 2-3 weeks that you're at the Olympics. You're just surrounded by so many athletes, and you talk to them and you see them practice and you see them compete, and you all just kind of come out with pretty similar experiences, and that's pretty cool that you all get to have that shared experience. I really wish I got to go see like, tennis, gymnastics, and swimming are the big ones, and they're big for a reason, because they're really exciting to go watch, especially in person. But like breakdancing, a lot of the smaller ones too are really cool. And I wish I got to go see like rock climbing, speed climbing, I guess they had at the Olympics. Maybe some of the biking and some of the other niche swimming stuff. So if I get to go to another Olympics, I'll definitely take more time to do those smaller things.
I guess that is definitely the advantage of the viewer at home, is like you can, turn on whatever gold zone they had and watch, 8 things at once. Where if you're in the village, maybe you don't have quite the luxury. I think Hammer was on, or started on August 2nd. And so you're in the village for, a week before then, or you're in Paris for a week before then. What's that kind of like, knowing you're there and you have to like wait, in the anticipation and kind of the anxiety of knowing you have to be there for a couple days before you actually get to compete?
Yeah, that's tough. I kind of struggle with that, honestly, because you're there. It's not like it's a relaxing environment, right? Like the village it's very much so like a dorm room. And, you guys are probably comfortable with that because you're currently in dorms. But as an adult, having like my own apartment and my own space and living with my fiance and all these things, to then go and have to like share a room or share a suite in like a white box. And then also you're just surrounded by just like highly anxious, ready to compete people who you watch compete, and it goes good or bad, but then you start just running through these scenarios in your head. So for me, it's almost like I would almost rather, again, if I get to go to an Olympics again, I would rather stay outside the village or do something elsewhere, do my own training, and then kind of come into the village the day or two before, because it is just like a very high intensity environment, and it can get pretty distracting.
I want to ask, like, take the audience through, because you've been to, numerous Olympics now and haven't won a medal. In terms of how hard is it, to to get there, but then B, to come through and win a gold or a silver, because people always say the worst place in the Olympics is fourth, right? Because then you never know. But if you can just kind of describe how difficult it is. I know that's hard to kind of summarize, but so the audience and us have a better idea of it.
Yeah, I think the thing that's lost in the coverage of the Olympics, and they try to, bring it to people's attention, but I don't know how successful it is the idea that I'm not just training, I didn't just train this past year just for this Olympics, right? Like I train all the time, year round, in all the years that there isn't an Olympics. Now, luckily, track and field, I have every other year. There's a World Championships as well, which I'm training for this coming summer. But I think there's so many other little steps that go into making the Olympics. When you watch the Olympics, you turn it on and it's on TV and there's those people there and you see them competing against the other people that are there. And I think there's loss of like the steps that took to get there, right? Because for track specifically, so the way you qualify for the Olympics is you either, in the hammer throw, I'll just talk from my own experience. In the hammer throw, you have to either throw a certain distance, which is usually very far, right? Like a top 10 type mark in the world will auto qualify you to qualify for the Olympics. That doesn't mean you get to go. And then if you don't have that super far distance, you have to qualify via points, which means you have to be going to meets, you have to be winning them, you have to be doing really well at them in order to get a top 32 world ranking, essentially, right? And only from that selection of top 32 world ranking and getting top 3 at our US trials do you even get to go to the Olympics. And there's scenarios where, the guy who got 3rd this year at our trials in the hammer didn't even get to go to the Olympics because he didn't have a high enough ranking and he didn't throw far enough. And that's just the way it goes. And that's unfortunately a big part of the sport. But even just to get to the Olympics, there's all these little steps and hoops and hurdles you have to get through. And then once you're there, you're also competing against the best athletes in the world. And I think some of that context kind of gets lost when you watch the Olympics, just because you're comparing everyone to what you see on the screen at that point in time, right? And I kind of like that. There's a joke that always goes around during every Olympics where they should have one normal person who's never competed in the event do it just to show the comparison. But you almost do kind of need that, or at least get an idea of like what an average throw for like a college athlete or like, a semi-pro athlete would be throwing at the event to kind of see the context of like, oh, we're throwing so much further. And even though like, yeah, I got 6th, right? But I was really like 1.5 meters away from getting a meter and less than that, than getting a medal, which is literally like one of my arm lengths, right? Like that's nothing in the grand scheme of things compared to how far we're throwing. So it's tough. And I think it's all those little things that kind of build up into that one moment, make it both very stressful, but also exciting in a way, right?
I assume knowing that surely keeps you motivated for trying to make the Olympics in 2028 in the U.S. I wanted to ask, because you mentioned getting enough like points or ranking points to qualify. I know that a lot of Diamond League meets do not have hammer throw. So how do you kind of, when you build out your schedule looking many years in advance to kind of have that world ranking, how do you decide what meets you're going to go to? Also considering, you have other aspects of your life, you're coaching around, doing all those other things. How do you build out your schedule?
Yeah, I think a lot of that I do have an agent who kind of gets me into meets and arranges a lot of that for me. So a lot of it falls onto her. But it's also just looking at what other meets people are competing at, a lot of my competitors from other countries, right? But then also I'm pretty plugged into what our national governing body, USA Track and Field, kind of puts on and what they host. And they usually have a handful of meets every year that are worth more points. And the way the whole point system works is there's just different tiers of meets, right? Like at the very simplest level, there's bronze, silver, gold. You get more points if you win a gold meet. You get less points if you win a bronze meet. and then they just average together your top 5 meets. So looking at a season, it's really about looking at what meets I have on my world ranking already, because they'll start to kind of lose points after some time, right? And then kind of planning out, being like, okay, I probably need 2 more gold meets. So maybe I'll go to this one in the US, and then I'll contact my agent about maybe getting into another one that's in Europe. But it's really just like looking at the schedules, looking at the timing of things, and trying to kind of plan out, when I'm going to be in good shape, and trying to also plan out doing these high level meets while also preparing for the trials or worlds or the Olympics, kind of squeezing in there, right? Like, I don't want to go to a meet in Europe 2 days before, our Olympic trials, because then I'm not going to be able to make the team. So kind of just planning it out, kind of like holistically, and looking at the whole season, to be able to, 1, have 5 meets, and then 2, give yourself enough time to recover and prepare for the next one.
I know you've been competing in pretty much national competitions since high school, and even maybe before that. But I wanted to go back to 2016 when you really had that breakout meet at the qualifiers, and then you decided you're going to come back and spend another year in college. First, like, how did you decide to take your grad year at Rutgers? I know obviously it was before the transfer portal was really open up as the way it is now, so I'm sure it was different in kind of the way the options worked, and would not be what it is now. But what's that experience like? You've been to an Olympics and you're going to come back and compete in college, and how do you end up deciding to go to Rutgers?
Yeah, there was definitely part of me that was considering not going and competing. I had 1 year left at Cornell, and then I had another year because I had a redshirt year while I was at Cornell, so I had a year to do my grad school. And I was very briefly considering turning pro, and then not finishing off my eligibility with the NCAA. But track and field, unfortunately, and the throws specifically in track and field, like if I had won trials in the 100-meter and then I went to the Olympics and maybe made the final or something, I probably wouldn't have gone back to the NCAA system, right? But the opportunities really just weren't there. And then also there was part of me that was like, well, I still need to finish off school and finish off what I started at Cornell, because I think I really enjoyed being on the team. That was a really important part of my development, and a big reason why I got to Rio in the first place. And I didn't want to lose that if I had an opportunity to continue to have that for the last couple, or I guess the 1 more year I had there. And then going into the grad program, it was really as simple as just, I had an extra year of eligibility and I really wanted to do a grad program. I couldn't do it at Cornell. And I looked around. There wasn't the transfer portal then, but there was a system where it was like the school would release your eligibility somehow, and then you were able to just kind of go talk with schools, almost like you were being recruited in high school again, right? So talked with a bunch of schools. My coaches who I had worked with in high school and then kind of stayed in touch with through college also lived in the greater New York City area, so I knew I wanted to go somewhere kind of close to them just to have access to them going forward, right? So that really narrowed my choices down. And then Rutgers had a program that I was interested in. The coaches were really cool, and it was close to where I wanted to be. So everything kind of just came together really nicely for that. And I'm really glad I did. It kind of set off my chain of events to get to where I am now. But yeah, I mean, trying just to make the most of the opportunities, because I wasn't going to be going pro. Wanted to make sure I was getting in, as much out of my college eligibility, trying to get a master's program so that when I do retire from sport, that maybe it's a little bit easier for me to get a job I want or something like that. So trying to think about, the long term, not just with my sport, but also with my professional career, was a big part of those decisions.
I think that's pretty much all I got. I had one more question. I personally am a big fan of Tracksmith, and I know you were part of their amateur program for a while. So do you have a favorite, piece of Tracksmith clothing that you have any favorites?
I loved their actually there's a bag, a Tracksmith bag right here. I'm technically with Nike now, so shit. But they're great. I mean, the clothing was really cool, but what I really enjoyed about Tracksmith was their focus on amateurism and they really tried hard to provide support to athletes that were maybe on kind of in that gray area. Track is one of those sports where really only the people at the tippy top are making, livable income off of it. The rest of it's all, you get grants and you get funding and you can make it work in the other events, but it's definitely, if you're kind of on the edge of getting that funding and, like you're qualifying for trials, but you're not doing well enough to get funding from USATF, Tracksmith was able to step in and provide some support to at least some of the runners and then a few of the field event athletes. And I thought that was really cool and something that desperately needed in our sport. So yeah, I mean, other than this bag, I thought their singlets really cool. I love the old school like slash that they do. I think it's just like a really cool like retro vibe that they got going on, and I think that's neat.
Super, Rudy. Thank you very much for taking the time, and I really appreciate it. And we'll see you around campus. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks guys. Really appreciate it. It was fun.
Well, it was an absolutely wild weekend in college football. Maryland wasn't necessarily playing. In fact, Maryland wasn't playing at all, which means they didn't lose a game. But we still have a lot to go over to preview the Northwestern game and talk a little bit about the Indiana game that happened 2 weeks ago. Sam, it was a while ago, but what happened in that Indiana game?
History. Maryland football was historically bad in that game. They became the first Big Ten team over the past decade to win the turnover battle by 4 or more and still lose the game. They're one of 13 FBS teams to have done it, or Power 5 teams to have done it over the past decade. So just a really, really sloppy game, offensively, defensively. Indiana's obviously ranked now. They're 6-0 for the first time, probably in school history. Who knows? But that game was for the taking. Maryland could have absolutely won that game, but they also, guys, if they played that game 10 times, they probably lose that game 10 times. They had 4 turnovers. They had multiple opportunities that could have been capitalized, and they didn't do it. Obviously, Ty Felton and Caden Prather both were out for a little bit, but the lack of offensive cohesion outside of Roman Hemby's big run, that ground game didn't really get going. And then, Mike, this secondary and defensive pass rush, I think, is really getting brought under scrutiny, and for good reason. They have not done a good enough job at stopping the pass. They're getting splash plays, but consistently on a down-to-down basis, opposing passers are just shredding this team.
Yeah, outside of the 2 starting safeties with Clendon Miller and Dante Trader, this is a pretty young secondary with those cornerbacks. You mentioned the 4 turnovers. Not often you force 4, you give the ball over no times, and you still lose the game. But I kind of wanted to look at what Maryland did once they got those turnovers, and I think it's kind of revealing on how the game played out. So it went punt, 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 turnover on downs. So yes, it's great they got those turnovers, but if you can do nothing with it, offense goes kind of stagnant like we saw in stretches against Indiana 2 weeks ago. That's the result you're going to get. Now, looking forward to Northwestern on Friday night, I think it's pretty obvious to say this is a must-win game. There's not really many games that you could say are winnable on the Terps schedule when you're looking forward. When you see USC, yes, they just lost, but that is still a very good team. Minnesota, Rutgers, Iowa, Penn State, Oregon. These are all tough games that are ahead, and we started the year saying they could start 6-0. They've already lost 2 of those games. Not a lot of assurance for the other easier conference opponents that lie on the schedule, like in Iowa, like a Rutgers, like a Northwestern even. I don't think you can call this game an easy Maryland win after seeing Indiana's performance and then the performance against Michigan State.
Yeah, Mike, I think Vegas would disagree with you. Maryland, at the time of this recording, is something like a 10-point favorite. And I said at the Michigan State game, that line makes absolutely no sense. If you've followed Maryland football for the past 10 years, that makes absolutely no sense. And honestly, if I was making the line, I'd probably make it about a field goal. So like you said, if you look at the rest of the schedule, I mean, I want to get your guys' opinions on it. How many wins does this Maryland team finish with? They have 3 right now, and the schedule is not easy at all. I'll give my prediction first. I think they get 2 more wins this season, and that'd be the max I think they could get.
Yeah, I'd probably put it at 5 wins, maybe 6. I think they'll probably beat Northwestern, and then
you're saying overall.
Yeah, so
yeah. So 5 or 6 more wins would be
Yeah, that'd be pretty incredible. No, 2 or 3 more wins. I think they probably beat Northwestern, and then 2 of 3 against Iowa, Minnesota, and Rutgers. But that seems, even the way this team's playing, a little much. I would probably give them 6. I think Billy Edwards is probably talented enough to pull out a couple, and Felton, but I don't feel great about it.
Yeah, I would say that 5 to 6 range is probably right. You're looking at Minnesota, Rutgers, Iowa, Northwestern, those types of games, but I
Say
don't
they
think
finished.
Minnesota
Say
is.
they even
Yeah,
finished with 6 wins, right? Like,
yeah.
and beat, what? Then they'd have wins over Virginia, UConn, Villanova, Northwestern, Minnesota, and Rutgers. Is that even like bowl worthy, Brendan?
I mean, to talk about what I talked about 2 episodes ago, the last time we had an episode of this format, Maryland doesn't beat teams that finish with winning records. And so if they did what you just said, probably Rutgers and Minnesota would be the only ones. I mean, we don't know how the rest of the season is going to shake out, but if you look at it, that means they're likely not actually going to win those games. And so it's really hard to know. And I mean, yeah, that's like I've always said, winning 6 games and beating an FCS school is not all that impressive. So, I mean, this isn't something new that we know, but this season, and barring some sort of miracle down the, second half of the season or the, final 2/3 of the season, it's just all in all failure.
It's crazy how quickly narratives can flip. I was thinking today, Minnesota beat USC, right? And imagine Maryland even beats Michigan State. Okay, let's start there. So then you're looking at 4-1 heading into Northwestern, big Friday night game. You beat that game. You're at 5-1 heading into USC, which I think the 3 of us here would say, okay, you feel pretty good about that. Like, USC has looked vulnerable. They've lost 2 road Big Ten games. Like, you can pull that upset off, and you can start to feel good about something. Now instead they're 3-2, an extra loss to Indiana. I don't think many people give them any chance against the Trojans, and after that it's like, ooh, like it gets even tougher. So it just, these games are played on such thin margins, and one loss can really just seesaw a season, and Maryland too often lets that happen, right? Where a lot of other teams can maybe respond that thing, but one loss generally seems to set this program off one way or the other. So I think it's kind of fascinating to think about midway through the season, just under it.
Yeah, the only thing going for Maryland against USC is they played Penn State the week before, which is going to be a brutal game. And, kind of what we talked about, we're talking about, upsets we saw in college football this past weekend, Vanderbilt beating Alabama, something like that, where, one of the top teams in the country plays another top team in the country. There's kind of that hangover effect, but, it's hard to say how competitive that game will really be. So, we'll have to see going through the football schedule, but, Oregon and Penn State now 2 of the top 4 teams in the country on Maryland's schedule, which wouldn't have necessarily predicted going into the year. It's just the road keeps getting tougher, and it seems like in a year where Maryland, going into it had such an easy Big Ten schedule. Not still necessarily the case, but fans have to be disappointed they could not have capitalized at least before the bye week.
Brendan, you brought up great points there, and I think that you left out one key one. Just bring on, Billy Edwards or one of these defensive backs, and they'll turn their season around, because that's basically what's happened to the men's soccer group. Colin Griffiths come on the show and turned into, I would say, Lionel Messi type, Cristiano Ronaldo maybe. Griffiths gone off 3 goals in the last 3 games, all since appearing on Under the Shell. The men's soccer team looking good, B. What's going on here with Sasha's team?
Yeah, I've read a lot of reporting about the men's soccer team, but nobody has seemed to mention that Colin Griffith has done all this after appearing on this podcast. They can thank us later, but he's on an absolute tear, and he looks like maybe one of the best scorers in the NCAA right now. Last year he didn't play in that many games because he was injured and didn't score any goals, and this season he's come back looking in his true form, and he has been unstoppable. Every time this Maryland team seems down and out, he curls a beautiful goal in, and the team is revived, the fans are revived, and then, if what happens on Saturday night, Saddam Masareka gets his first goal, and, it's a big 3 points for Maryland to put them in first place in the Big Ten. They have the weekdays off, and they travel to Washington on Friday, play a late game Friday night, a little Big Ten after dark, after the Maryland football game. I believe that game kicks off 10 Eastern time, so it's 7 p.m. in Washington. Washington's looked all right this season, kind of a middle of the Big Ten team, but it's going to be interesting to see how Maryland will play traveling all that distance to the West Coast, but I imagine they'll have enough time to get prepared for that one. And coming back next Tuesday, they'll play George Mason, a team that's ranked currently, probably not expected going into the year, but they're 9-1. Strength of schedule is not too great, so George Mason's best opponent at that time will definitely be Maryland, so that'll be more of a test for George Mason than it will be Maryland, but still, midweek game out of conference. We'll have to see if the Terps show out for that one, but men's soccer is the hottest team on campus by far, and we're going to have to see if that continues. What have you guys seen out of men's soccer out of the past 2 weeks?
Loving what we see from Colin Griffith right now. I believe he is leading the team in goals. Correct me if I'm wrong. If not, he's tied. Yes, he is leading the team in goals. So great to see that under the shell push there. And I mean, they talked about it on the pod when they came on. Last year, had some games that were decided by 1 or 2 plays. Season can go completely different direction if those games went their way. This season seems they've came back motivated. They wanted to rebound, obviously, after one of the toughest seasons men's soccer has had under Coach Sasho. And it's great to kind of see that come to fruition.
Men's soccer obviously rebounded after a down year, but the case is not the same for women's soccer. Since we last recorded, they did pick up a point in Big Ten play. I'll give them a couple snaps for that one. Obviously, it was a 0-0 draw because they still have not scored in whatever it is now, 700 something in the low teens days. Last in the Big Ten with that 1 point. They play Penn State on Thursday. Penn State is 6th in the Big Ten. Since 2016, Maryland, they played them twice in 2016, but since then they've scored 1 goal against Penn State. They're outscored 19-1 in that time. And then they'll play Nebraska on Sunday. Nebraska is 6th to last in the Big Ten, so somewhere near the middle of the bottom. Still haven't won against them in a long time. Haven't scored a goal against them since 2018. I mean, it's going to be tough. These are the final 2 home games of the year. If you're women's soccer, these are 2 games you'd like to capitalize on. Sleep in your own bed, get a good night of sleep and all that type of stuff. And then you have to go on the road for the final 4 or 5 games of the season. These are the games, you want to be winning, you want to be competitive. And so, these are probably the last 2 tests that Maryland could pick up a goal in. And you got to think at this point, they should be all hands on deck to do so because, 2 seasons in a row, extending to maybe the 2.5 seasons in a row, we haven't scored a game. Big Ten play. It's not a good look. I wanted to give you guys one quick question. The RPI rankings in women's soccer, there are a total of 348 teams. Where do you think the University of Maryland ranks?
285th.
Mike, what you got?
Let's say 315.
All right, little bit of a over guess there. They're 201, so that puts them not the worst Power 5 or Power 4, whatever you want to call it now, team in the country, but I think the third worst Power 5 team, Power 4 team in the country.
Mike, you basically just said that they were the second to worst team.
I mean,
340 teams, right?
348. I mean, some of these teams at the bottom are clearly not that good. Some teams haven't won a game at all. Maryland's won a couple games this year, so obviously they weren't going to be near the bottom. There are teams that haven't won at all, but being ranked in the bottom 5 for Power 5 teams it's just not that good of a look.
But it's not that surprising either. They've scored the least amount of goals in the Big Ten this year. It's not hard when you score none. And then they've also allowed the second most goals in the Big Ten. Even when their defense is playing good, they're still getting 0-0 draws because they just can't get the ball in the net. So, it's kind of par for the course for the team at this point.
Yeah, and it's not going to get easier. Nebraska on Sunday, like Brendan said, they haven't scored a goal against the Cornhuskers since 2018. So that's going to be a tough one to conquer. And it's been a tough year for women's soccer. It'll continue to get tough here towards the end, just like it will be for the field hockey team, guys. They're on a bit of a roll here, just to kind of catch everybody up on what the field hockey team's been doing. They recently earned a top 10 road win, massive game, a 5-0 victory against number 10 Iowa, and its largest conference win in more than 2 years. So a big win for the field hockey team. They now have 4 ranked wins on the season, Brendan. that resume slowly starting to build up. I think it's looking like this team could be poised for a 1 seed. They probably won't overtake Northwestern in the Big Ten, but right up there. What do you think they need to do the rest of the way to kind of get home field advantage throughout the tournament?
It was good to see them kind of get back on track and score some goals. The 5-goal game against Iowa was obviously a strong performance after some of those games where Maryland didn't put the ball in the net at all. You're coming up, obviously the schedule isn't going to get that much easier, but I think continue to string together wins, and I know Mike will have a bit of a more in-depth prediction for us.
Yeah, that number 1 seed in the Big Ten, probably out of reach at this point. Northwestern is a perfect undefeated right now, 12-0, no losses in conference play, no losses, period. I do think that the number 2 seed is obtainable. However, Michigan is 2-0 in conference play. They do have some losses on their overall record, however, and the Terps are 3-1 in conference play. So the Wolverines dropped some conference games. The Terps stay perfect to end the season. They've got 4 ranked games remaining. That includes 1 against non-con Princeton. But win those Big Ten games, they can move up a slot. But that number 1's probably not reachable. And probably poised to see a postseason matchup against Northwestern, who has been a difficult opponent for the Terps as of late.
It seems like if you're talking about field hockey or women's lacrosse, you can pretty much just chalk it up to say Maryland and Northwestern will play each other at some point in the Big Ten tournament or even the NCAA tournament. But that's a good conversation to be in, and one obviously the Maryland field hockey team and women's lacrosse team would be happy to have us talk about. Moving over to volleyball, I talked about it before, but they had 2 games that I thought were going to be easier for them heading into Big Ten play. They had 2 home games, Northwestern and Iowa. These are week back, but they lost both of them in 5 sets, and then went to Penn State, 3rd best team in the country, and they got they took a game on them, so they lost 3-1, which strong performance, and led them into a 3-0 win against Rutgers. But the schedule does not get much easier. On the road against Wisconsin, who's the number 9 team in the country at the time of this recording, and Minnesota, who's the 12th team in the country. Both games Friday and Saturday. Gonna be very tough games for Maryland volleyball, and that's what life's like in the Big Ten. So not gonna get that much easier.
Yeah, Adam Hughes, bad 2 sets to drop, both in the 5th. Had it too, was up in both games, or both contests, and couldn't get it done. So those are just kind of daggers, especially against 2 teams who have struggled as much as Iowa and Northwestern have in the Big Ten, and to drop those is really tough. So big tests here coming up. They're going to start to get into the meat of what we consider Big Ten volleyball to be, which is brutal. I mean, Nebraska, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. These are all top-notch programs, and it'll get tougher for Adam Hughes' team before it gets easier. It's been kind of a struggle here in fall sports, so we're going to turn it to winter really quick. The basketball team doing some recruiting, as people call. Big time commitment here for Kevin Willard's squad, and then a big potential commit. Brent or Mike, take us through a little bit about what happened. Start off with Jordan Scott here upcoming. What can Terps fans expect?
Yeah, Thursday we're going to get Jordan Scott. He is a small forward from Virginia. He's going to be making his commitment. He's switching between Maryland, Michigan, and Virginia Tech. This is a top 100 recruit per all recruiting websites. Does seem like he's going to go to Michigan State. That's kind of where the predictions are lying right now. Would be interesting to see if he did come to Maryland. We've talked about it before, but his mom is former Terp women's basketball star Christy Winters Scott, who you now see on TV. But then last week, the Terps did get a big-time commitment in guard Christian Jeffrey. He is a number 4 player overall in Maryland, number 94 nationally, according to 247 Sports. And that is the 2nd year in a row now that Kevin Willard has gotten a local guard from the area. Last year, he got Malachi Palmer. And with Jeffrey, I think it's kind of interesting to look at the type of player the Terps are getting. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. A lot of people talk about his physicality, his toughness, his motor, his aggressive play, and that kind of aligns with their other commit for 2025, Marcus Jackson. He's a power forward. He's another guy who scouts talk about his physicality, his toughness, his aggressiveness. So I think you can kind of see Kevin Willard targeting a specific type of freshman, someone who could compete in the Big Ten immediately, compete with that physicality. That's something he talked about last offseason. The reasons bringing in Jordan Geronimo was that physicality, that toughness. So maybe he's hoping to see those freshmen play more big-time minutes early on for his team. Obviously, Jamie Kaiser, Jonathan Lamoth didn't really get too much playing time at the beginning of last year or in general, leading to their transfers. But big-time commitments for Coach Willard. Commitment.
Yeah, and as long as they can do a little bit more shooting than Deshaun Harris-Smith, who's kind of billed as that physical guard, that'll hold you back, I think, as a freshman, especially at the positions that these guys play. So got to be able to make jump shots. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. As we move forward into things that are happening right now, those are picks. Michael, you finally cooled off, but everybody kind of had a tough week. Both me and Mike went 1 and 2, and then bringing up the rear, as always, your producer, Brendan Weissel, who we'll start with today. Just kind of throw him a little acorn.
I don't know. I've been so bad. I'm considering right now just taking every pick that I have and flipping it. I think I've gone something like 2 and 7 the past 3 weeks. Don't fact check that, but it's been a rough going. But I'll stick with what I picked originally. Missouri minus 27.5 against UMass. UMass should not be able to compete with any Power 5 school, and Missouri is coming off a terrible loss. That game could get ugly. They could score 28 in the first quarter, so that line makes no sense to me. Penn State minus 4.5 against USC. Penn State's been rolling. They do have to go all the way out to California, but I think they take care of that one. And then Kansas State minus 5.5 against Colorado. That pick is mostly just to troll Mike.
I guess I'll go next, following up after your troll. I do agree with that pick, though. I don't think Colorado is going to win this week. But to start off my picks, we're going to get Alabama favored by 21 points versus South Carolina. I think this is going to be a bounce back week for the Tide. Army UAB under 54.5 points. That's a Service Academy versus Trent Dilfer's terrible team. And then Clemson, Wake Forest over 60.5. High scoring conference game.
Guys, if there was ever a Saturday to just like clear your books and just watch college football, this is the week. I mean, you look at the schedule, you got Red River rivalry, Texas, Oklahoma, Penn State at USC, Stanford at Notre Dame, Ohio State playing Oregon. I mean, some incredible games, Ole Miss, LSU, Maryland, Northwestern. I mean, you're looking at a loaded slate, especially that last one. So we'll start it off with one of the big games of the weekend. I'll take Oregon +4 versus Ohio State. Give me the home underdog here. Definitely to cover. I would take money line if I were you. Then I'm going to follow that up with Arizona +4 versus BYU. Tatoria McMillan is disgusting. BYU doesn't have anybody who can cover him, so I'll take Arizona in that one. And then finally, going to go down south to take South Florida +7 against Memphis. Going to get back on the winning ways this week and start to nip at those heels of Michael House, who will start to fall.
All right, we'll see about that.
I don't think I can get another pick wrong the entire year, honestly, and win. I'm out of it, right?
You've been cooked since freshman year.
I think we got to do a fact check on the record. There is, whatever the graphics last week, there's no way I only have 4 picks right, though. That just cannot be right. Like, I feel like I'm getting trolled at this point.
You should get +1 for Terrific Terp, which
is coming up right now. This is a fun one, though. So if you made it this far in the episode, I'd recommend you stick around for the next, 2 minutes. Doyle Preston Royal did it all. There aren't many people who can say they served as a head coach of one sport at Division I school, but even fewer can say they were the head coach of 2 different sports, and even fewer can say they were a dean on top of that. Royal was the head soccer coach and head tennis coach at Maryland, was also the assistant dean of men at the University of Maryland. Royal was born in Washington, D.C. in 1919. 20 years later, he found himself on the tennis and soccer teams at UMD. His most notable accomplishment while as a student at the university was that he served as captain of the men's tennis team. After graduating in 1943, he joined the Army. He fought on Utah Beach against Germany and was awarded the Silver Star for disabling a German tank with a hand grenade. Also, while in the service, he nearly had to have his feet amputated because of the cold during the Battle of the Bulge. Luckily, he was able to keep his feet and was evacuated back to the U.S., where Royal made his way back to College Park in 1946. He was the first person to start the men's soccer program. He would go on to coach the team until 1973. In that time, he won 20 conference championships and a national championship, which included a run from 1953 to 1968, where they won the conference title every year. 8 years after becoming the head soccer coach, he became the head tennis coach, and he held that position for the next 27 years, where he won a pair of ACC titles as well. When he left Maryland in 1980, his life and career didn't stop. He continued to play tennis into his 80s and competed in many USTA events. He won the 1999 USTA Mid-Atlantic Men's 80s singles title on clay and a pair of outdoor titles in Maryland in the 2000s. Royal lived to 101 years old and the second most wins in Maryland history as a head coach, behind Burton Shipley. And maybe most importantly, he is this week's Terrific Terp.
Battle of the Bulge. What a poll. What a job, Brendan. Way this guy finds them every week. Doyle Royal. What a name. And what a terrific Terp to end us off. If you listen to this one all the way through, thank you so much. If you listen to this and didn't listen to last week's episode, go do that right when you're done. I promise that one maybe was even a little more entertaining. So check that out at Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social, so you can follow us there. To everybody, enjoy your Friday. Happy holidays to those who celebrate, and have a good rest of your fall weekend.
Guess what? You've got Under the Shell Podcast. Nobody does it better.